And this is not a new topic for the Russian people. From the time they intervened in Syria in order to save Syria from becoming another Libya, they knew that there was risk, there was danger, and that this could provoke the Great War, nuclear war, between the United States leading NATO, and in which Turkey is a member state, and Russia, and now Russia's ally, China. So the Russian people are already aware about the possibility of a great war and about the consequences, possible consequences of that great war. And we want to begin by thanking the Russian government and thanking the Russian people who supported the government and did not criticize and condemn the government, supported the government in that very courageous stand that they took to save Syria from becoming another Libya, to save the Christians of Syria from being slaughtered by Dajjal's warriors. A CIA-equipped mob of Dajjal's warriors called ISIS. We want to also thank Russia and its leadership for having intervened recently to stop that Israeli war machine, bloodthirsty Israeli war machine, which was bent on exterminating the Palestinians, Muslims as well as Christians, in Gaza. And we thank Allah that as a consequence of Russian intervention, Israel had to stop its slaughter of the Palestinians. So thank you to Russia. The Great War is something which will cause great suffering in Russia because it's going to be nuclear war. And the United States and NATO are going to send all the nuclear weapons they could possibly send, because this is a war to the finish. And nuclear weapons are going to cause immense damage and devastation in Russia. And many, many, many will die. But the good news is that the Russian people have demonstrated to the world that they have faith in their hearts. And they're not afraid to die. And we on this side from the world of Islam, we look at you and we admire a people who are not afraid to die. And this is as a consequence of something in your heart, something called faith. And you are therefore an Orthodox Christian people with whom we have a sense of affinity. We are brothers. We are brothers. You follow the Son of Mary, the true Messiah. You follow the Son of Mary, the true Messiah. We follow Muhammad. Allah's blessings be upon him. We also are conscious of the fact that the Russian people have the capacity to make sacrifice. You sacrificed tremendously in the First World War. And before that, you sacrificed and you suffered tremendously in 3 years of the Crimean War. And millions died in the First World War. Millions died in the Second World War, even though you were led in the Second World War by the Soviet Union, which was an atheist state, and yet you fought courageously to stop Germany. And so you are people who are accustomed to suffering. And we admire that you show no sign of fear, even though you know there's a war coming. And it's going to be nuclear war. Our Prophet, Allah's blessing be upon him, informed us of where the war would begin. Yes, we know it's going to begin in the north of Syria. That's what he said. Our Prophet, Allah's blessing be upon him, informed us of where the war would begin. Yes, we know it's going to begin in the north of Syria. That's what he said. But the beginning of the war is not as important as the consequences of the war. And the consequences of the war is, he said, 99 out of every 100 who fight in that war would be killed. And so it's a unique war that's coming. It's a war in which weapons of mass destruction would be used for the first time on such a scale. And we have only admiration for you, that you're not afraid of the consequences of that war. When we look at the other side, we see rent an army. We see people being brought to fight and being offered cards and being offered green cards and all these things. And they're only there in the army fighting for the monetary dividends. So that can't be an army with faith. But on your side, it's an army of faith. And that's a big difference between the two, when these two armies face each other in the Great War. Not only are we proud of the fact that there are many, many, many Muslims fighting in the Russian armed forces, yes, from Chechnya, for example. But we have something more to share with you in today's video. And that is that the Lord God Himself will be helping you in that war. This is how we start our subject today, Russia and the Great War. And we want to take you to the Quran and to explain the Quran as perhaps never explained before to you in Russia. The only knowledge that you have of Islam is Ottoman Islam. And Ottoman Islam was one that provoked such pain, suffering, disgust, bitterness, and hatred, that it has lingered and lingered and lingered for centuries. And now that we present to you a different Islam, the one that comes from the Quran, not from the barrel of an Ottoman gun. It takes your women and enslave them, and take your sons and convert them to Islam by force, to the eternal shame and disgrace of the world of Islam. Today we take 600 years of Ottoman brainwashing, and we take the book of Allah, the Quran, and we wipe it away. What does the Quran say to you? The Orthodox Christian world, led by Russia, this is what we want to share with you. There are many who will listen to this video and say, Sheikh, we heard that already. Well then, why don't you go and listen to someone else? Because I'm talking today to the Russian people who may never have ever heard this before, and they're hearing it for the first time. We know the outcome of the big war that's coming, the Great War. We know that the Lord God is going to intervene in this Great War. And we want to take you to the Quran. We want to take you to what the Quran has recorded. At that moment when they were attempting to crucify Jesus, the son of Mary. And he did not know what was going to happen. But the Lord God, he knew. And he spoke to Jesus. And those words are recorded in the Quran. And I share them with you today. It is located in the third surah of the Quran called IMRAN, the people, the house of IMRAN. IMRAN being the father of Moses and of Aaron. IMRAN. And he speaks to Jesus and he says, "Ba'da'uzu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem." Oh Jesus, Ya Isa, I'm going to take your soul. And of course, when the Lord God takes the soul, he can either keep it or return it. And if he keeps it, well, they have succeeded, they have killed him. But the Lord God said, no, they did not succeed. I made it appear like that. And so therefore, he took the soul and he returned it, but they didn't know that. And then he said, I'm going to raise you unto myself. And so the son of Mary was raised unto the Lord God himself. This is the Quran. And I'm going to cleanse and purify you of all the blasphemous things they have uttered against you and your mother. And today, we live in a world in which they don't dare to stand up and speak those things about Jesus anymore, because the world will crush them today. It's been purified. Now listen. And the Quran then goes on to say that I'm going to raise those who follow you, O Jesus, raise them high and dominant over the other group which rejected him and which hurled these blasphemous things against him, these disbelievers. And when I raise them, the followers of Jesus, to that position of dominance, they will remain there until the end of the world. And so now, the Quran is helping you in Russia to understand what happened these last 20 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, after the chaos which followed, this miraculous rise of Orthodox Christian Russia, with missile technology second to none in the world, to a position of military dominance today. This is what the Lord God said in the Quran 1400 years ago. And this is what has now happened. I am saying this to you so you might know what the Quran says that is applicable to you. That not only are you going to defeat NATO in this war, but more than that, that even after you have defeated NATO in the war, you will still remain the dominant force in the world. There will be none who can challenge you. And you just gave the world a very pleasing demonstration of that when you stopped Israel. The Quran speaks of you about the Orthodox Christian world, and there's a whole chapter in the Quran, and it's called Surah Rum. And Rum, of course, comes from the original term Rome. So when the pagan Roman Empire left Rome and went to Constantinople, they kept the name Rome with it. And that name Rome came in the Quran as Rum. But then came the transformation of that Roman Empire to become a Christian empire. And so Rome in the Quran is not pagan, it's Christian. And the Quran speaks positively of that Christian empire which was based in Constantinople, and which was called the Byzantine or the Holy Byzantine Empire. Some pronounce it as Byzantine. And Allah speaks in the Quran and says that you will have two victories. By His help, you will be victorious twice. And the first one took place 600 years ago when the Quran was revealed at that time, when the Holy Byzantine Empire defeated Persia. And then says the Quran, there'll be a second one. But in between the two, there's something happening, because the first one is described as before, min qabl, and the second one is described as min ba'd, after. Two victories, one before and one after. In between there must be something. What is it? It's the Great Schism of 1054, when the West parted from you and they went their way and said, we don't care two peanuts for the law anymore. And so they violated the Sabbath. And the Lord God cursed them, the West, but not you. The Lord God is pleased to help you to two victories, one before the schism of 1054, which took place in the lifetime of the Prophet, Allah's blessings be upon, and one to come after. It hasn't come as yet. The second one hasn't come as yet. And I'm sharing with you my view. I can be wrong, that the second one is coming soon, when you'll be victorious and you'll defeat that world that was cursed by the Lord God. NATO. The Quran also speaks positively about the followers of Jesus, and says about them something remarkable. And I want to share that with you today. It says that at that time in history, when the Jews are most hostile of all to you, and at that time when another people whose very foundation is heresy and blasphemy, shirk, when they also are waging war on us and showing immense hatred, war on Islam, at that time, says the Quran, listen carefully in Russia, at that time you will find, says Allah to us, He says, you will find that those who will be closest in love and affection for you, Muslims, would be a people who declare, we are Christians. So these are not secularized Christians whose primary loyalty is to their national identity. We are Americans, we are French, we are British, and whose religious faith is secondary, it's private, secularized Christians. No, these are a different kind of Christians whose primary identity is their faith. They're not secularized. These are a Christian people who still have the priesthood intact. And the priest occupies a position of great importance in society. These are a people who still have the institution of monasticism intact. And they cherish the monastery, and they cherish the monastic way of life. And finally the Quran says, and they're not arrogant, and they are not and arrogant people. They don't want to rule the world. That's Russia today. And so, you'll be surprised listening to me in Moscow that our Quran is saying that you would be closest in love and affection to us one day. When will that day come? I want to share with you now something more about the Great War that you may not have known before, and you may hear of it for the first time now. When I visited Moscow, I went to Moscow only once in my life. I stayed in a hotel close to the Kremlin and to the Red Square. I was able to walk across to the Red Square. And I lectured at the State University of Moscow. And they were surprised to hear our eschatology in that lecture. That after the Great War, the next event that our prophet has prophesied in the timeline of events of the end time, the next event to occur will be the conquest of Constantinople. Russia has been longing and longing and longing for Constantinople since the Ottoman Empire took it away, conquered Constantinople in 1453. It's not our purpose in this lecture to analyze that event of 1453. We've done it in other lectures. But from that day to this day, the hearts of the Orthodox Christian people have been weeping, and the hearts of those who proudly followed the Ottoman Empire been filled with pride with the victory of the Ottoman Empire over these infidels. They call them infidels. And the Lord God gave to these Muslims a mission to wipe out these infidels and to wage eternal war on the Christians. That's the kind of stuff we got from the Ottoman Empire. No one can challenge me on that. They're proud of their victories. But in the wake of the bogus jihad of the Ottoman Empire, bitterness and hatred for Islam came to the hearts of the Orthodox Christian people and the Russians, because the Ottomans waged endless wars on Russia. And so the only Islam you ever knew was the Islam that came from the Ottoman Empire. So how wonderful it must be today for you to listen to another Islam, which doesn't come from Ottoman Islam. It comes from the Book of God, from the Quran, and they cannot challenge the... I feel such joy in my heart today that we take 600 years of bogus Ottoman Islam and we move it aside and we present you with the words of the Lord God Himself. When He says that you, a people who declare proudly so, we are Christians, a people who are not secularized Christians, a people who don't say that a man can marry another man and get a marriage certificate, a people who still weep for Jerusalem, a people who will never bend their knees before the Zionist rulers of the world today, a people who still cherish the priesthood, a people who still cherish the monastic way of life and the monasteries, a people who are not arrogant, they don't want to rule the world. These Christians, says the Quran is speaking. These Christians will be closest in love and affection for you. And so we say to you, yes, You're going to suffer a lot in the war which is coming. The Russian people are going to make yet another tremendous sacrifice, as you have sacrificed in the past so many times. I don't have to tell you what you know. Yes, you're going to make one more sacrifice, and your sacrifice will be the greatest of all. But in this war which is coming, there's a fruit, a very sweet and lovely fruit to come at the end of the war. And that is our prophet has prophesied. And they must be shuddering now as this prophecy is around the corner. That a Muslim army, not an Ottoman army, a Muslim army, not an Ottoman army. I am talking to 600 years of history now. A Muslim army, not an Ottoman army. A Muslim army will conquer Constantinople. How wonderful are these words today, as we take 600 years of history and we sweep it away. And when that Muslim army conquers Constantinople, our prophet is proud. He's proud. He says, what a wonderful army. He says, what a wonderful commander. It's not going to be a regular army of the Pakistan Armed Forces or this armed force. No, it's going to be a people's army. The people who still have love for the Quran, the Book of Allah. They will conquer Constantinople. And finally, do you know why you have to wage that big war? I'll tell you why. Because at the end of that big war, when you have defeated NATO, NATO no longer controls the Bosphorus. At that time, a Muslim army will conquer Constantinople, and they can't stop it. Tell them that for me. They can't stop it, because our prophet has spoken. It must be like a bone in their necks now, that these words of mine. But guess what? Even though 600 years of brainwashing has taken place, the truth has come today from the Quran and is driving away all those clouds, all those brainwashing is being driven away. And more and more and more Muslims are accepting that this is the truth. Thanks and praise be to Allah. And so I share with you now this wonderful news, if you're in Russia, that the great sacrifice you're about to make in that great war will be followed by a lovely, lovely fruit. That when we conquer Constantinople, we will return Hagia Sophia to you. It's your cathedral. It was shameful. It was disgraceful. It was manifestly sinful what the Ottoman Empire did to that cathedral and what was repeated recently. And I say to you that on that day when Hagia Sophia returned to you, you would cry. You would cry that our prophet remembered you. And on that day when Hagia Sophia is returned to you, you and I, the world of Islam and the world of Christianity, the Christianity which follows Jesus, not the one which follows Santa Claus. These two worlds will come together in friendship and in fraternity. And it is with this alliance that history will now be taken to an end, which will witness the triumph of truth in Jerusalem. Thank you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.